When Nathaniel returns to his coastal hometown to confront the shadows of a broken marriage, a buried letter, and a haunting silence, he unravels a truth, darker than betrayal, one that could cost him everything he has left, including the woman he thought he had lost forever. The first night after my divorce was finalized, I checked into a motel off the interstate just outside of Charleston. It was the kind of place where no one looked twice at a man with a suitcase and tired eyes. I didn't expect to feel peace. I didn't expect much at all. I only needed stillness, not comfort. Not yet. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and regret. Its furnishings were dated, the wallpaper peeling slightly in the corners, the mattress sunken on one side like it had held the weight of too many sleepless nights. I stood in the doorway for a while after unlocking the room, unsure if I was stepping into a temporary shelter or the beginning of something I hadn't asked for. Earlier that day, I had signed the final papers in a glass-walled office downtown, while Erica sat across from me, looking like she was attending a job interview, not severing a decade of marriage. Her hair was tied up neatly, no trace of tears, no hesitation. Her eyes never met mine. She signed quickly, like someone checking boxes off a list. I envied how easy it was for her. When the lawyer handed me the last document to review, I stared at it longer than I needed to, not because I didn't understand it, but because the words felt like a final sentence, a conclusion I hadn't agreed to write. My signature came out shaky, not because I was uncertain, but because my hand no longer remembered how to say goodbye. On paper, on my way out, I stopped by the building's restroom, locked myself in a stall, and just stood there breathing like someone who had run a marathon and forgot how to stop. There were no tears, not then, only a dull ringing in my chest where something had once lived. By the time I arrived at the motel and waited at the front desk, I looked like someone who'd been asked to start his life over using borrowed pieces. The woman behind the counter had soft eyes and a voice that seemed to move through silence like watered-down stone. She didn't ask many questions. She only handed me the key and said what I didn't know I needed to hear. Some endings don't mean failure. Sometimes they just mean you stopped lying to yourself. That sentence echoed in my chest as I walked the narrow hallway to room 12. I remember gripping the brass key so tightly my fingers ached. The phrase rattled through my thoughts as I dropped my bag by the dresser and stared at the blank television screen. I hadn't even taken my coat off when the weight of everything landed on my shoulders. The silence in that room was heavy but honest, unlike the kind that filled my apartment during the last months with Erica. That silence was sharp, calculated, like we both were waiting to see who would speak first. Only neither of us wanted to risk what would come next. At some point, silence had become safer than words. I lay down on the bed, still fully dressed, staring at the ceiling with the key still clenched in my hand. My wedding ring was gone, left in a drawer at the old apartment. I didn't want to bring it with me, didn't want to carry that final symbol of something that had already emptied itself long before the ink dried on our divorce papers. The worst part wasn't the loneliness, it was the realization that I had already been lonely for months, maybe even years. I just hadn't admitted it. Not until Erica sat on the couch that Wednesday afternoon, fingers locked tightly in her lap, and looked at me like a stranger waiting to deliver bad news to someone they barely knew. "This marriage isn't working. You know it." Those were her exact words. I remember everything about that moment, the way the light filtered through the blinds, casting angled shadows on the hardwood floor, the faint hum of the fridge in the background, the folder she pulled from beside her like a prop in a play. She didn't even try to soften the delivery. It was clean, practiced, the kind of sentence you only say after you've repeated it 100 times in your mind. I didn't argue. I didn't ask her to reconsider. I stood there with my work bag still on my shoulder, tie slightly loosened, and tried to find a version of her I recognized. But she wasn't there. She had been gone for a long time. Her body was still in our living room, but her eyes had stopped seeing me months ago, maybe longer. The weeks that followed were filled with logistical conversations. Who gets what? What to do with the lease? How to divide things neither of us wanted. She asked for the apartment, said it felt like home. I didn't fight her. Even though I had paid for most of it, even though my name was on the lease, I let her have it. It wasn't about fairness, it was about closure, or whatever was left of it. I kept the car, my investments, and the boxes of memories too painful to unpack. Everything else I donated or left behind. I didn't tell many people. I wasn't in the mood for questions, for sympathy disguised as curiosity. I needed space to grieve what had never really healed. That's what brought me to this motel. The first night, I didn't sleep much. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying arguments, reliving good moments that now felt scripted, wondering if there was ever a time when she had looked at me and truly believed in us. I thought about the Friday she started going out, how the shift in her behavior had been so gradual that I mistook it for restlessness. At first, I supported it, told her to enjoy herself, that it was important to have time apart. But then her nights out became habits, her explanations vague. She started dressing differently, acting differently, coming home later and later. Confronted her one night, told her if she walked out that door again like she was single, she might as well not come back. I didn't say it to control her. I said it because I was scared. I could feel her slipping away. But instead of hearing my fear, she heard criticism, accused me of being insecure, controlling, weak. She said I was holding her back, called our life average. That word stung more than any insult. Average, as if loving someone quietly, providing stability, being consistent, was somehow a flaw. She stopped going out after that, but it didn't fix anything. Our home turned colder, more distant. Conversations were transactional. Her eyes rarely met mine. When they did, there was no warmth, only blame. I stopped trying to touch her. Every time I reached out, she recoiled like I was a stranger. Eventually, I became one dot in the motel, surrounded by unfamiliar furniture and silence that didn't carry her scent. I finally admitted something to myself. I had been pretending that if I loved harder, if I stayed quiet, if I worked more, things would get better. But love doesn't grow in silence. It suffocates. The next morning, I got coffee from the vending machine near the lobby. The receptionist was there again, reading a paperback behind the counter. She looked up, gave me a small smile, and asked how I slept. I said fine, though we both knew that wasn't true. Still, she didn't push. Her presence was quiet, like a bookmark in a long story, not interrupting, just holding space. That first week passed slowly. I read books I had been meaning to for years. I walked aimlessly around nearby streets. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. My therapist later told me that writing things down helps you reclaim the narrative. At the time, I just needed somewhere to put the ache. By the fifth night, I noticed the receptionist sitting outside during her break. She had a cigarette in one hand, coffee in the other, and was staring at the sky like it had answers. I asked if I could join her. She nodded, slid over, and said nothing for 5 minutes. That silence didn't feel heavy. It felt shared, like she understood. Her name was Lana. She had a soft laugh and eyes that seemed older than her face. I didn't tell her much about my situation. Just said I was between homes. She didn't ask for details. She told me about her dog, about the poetry book she was writing, about the way the motel used to be a diner before it changed hands. Her stories were gentle, simple, unburdened. I listened because I needed to. By the time the week ended, I still hadn't decided where to go next. My lawyer had emailed me about a small apartment that just opened up, said it was close to the city and in my price range. I told him I'd think about it. I wasn't ready to live somewhere that didn't yet feel like mine. On the 7th night, Lana handed me an extra cup of coffee without saying a word. She just smiled and went back to her paperwork. That gesture meant more than any apology I never received. It reminded me that connection doesn't always require explanation. Sometimes, it's enough to sit with someone in silence and know they see you. What I didn't know then was that the silence I had feared for so long would become the very thing that began to heal me. But healing isn't linear, and the truth I thought I had escaped was still waiting in the shadows. The apartment my lawyer mentioned was in a modest brick building near the edge of the city. It had a small balcony, outdated tiles in the kitchen, and creaky floors that gave away every step I took. But it was quiet. More importantly, it was mine. I moved in during the 3rd week of September, the air already crisp, leaves starting to show amber and rust. Lana helped me carry the lighter, boxers from the trunk. She didn't say much, just handed me a coffee and followed me up the stairs. We had grown into a rhythm that didn't need defining. She worked the front desk most nights. I sat on the metal bench outside the motel with my notebook or a book and waited to see if she'd come outside. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she didn't. We never scheduled it. It was organic, unspoken, like something older than language. She wasn't a placeholder for what I had lost. She wasn't a distraction. She was a mirror, quiet and calm, showing me that I still existed, even in the absence of someone else's validation. The apartment took time to settle into. The first week, I kept waking up thinking I was still in the motel, or worse, still in the old apartment. The layout was different, but grief doesn't recognize geography. It follows you until you've looked it in the face long enough to say its name without flinching. I spent hours placing books on shelves, sorting through what I had brought with me, trying to find order in the aftermath. My favorite chair from college made it into the living room. A photo of my mother in a wooden frame sat on the windowsill. Little things, quiet things, things that reminded me I had a life before the ache. On Sundays, Lana visited. She brought pastries or takeout, and always insisted on eating outside on the balcony, no matter the weather. She told stories about guests she'd checked in, some funny, some sad, some strange enough to make me laugh for the first time in months. We never talked much about my divorce. I mentioned Erica once, during a story about my blender breaking in the middle of the night. Lana didn't ask follow-up questions. She just passed me the last dumpling and smiled, like it was enough that I had told her anything at all. One night, as we sat on the balcony watching the distant skyline shimmer under streetlights, she leaned back and asked if I believed people changed or just revealed who they had always been. I didn't answer right away. I was still figuring that out. Erica hadn't always been cold. She hadn't always resented me. There was a time she looked at me like I was the place she wanted to live in. Somewhere along the way, that gaze turned into something sharp, something that saw me as an obstacle instead of a home. Lana didn't push. She just nodded, took a sip of wine, and said sometimes people leave, not because they want more, but because they don't know how to sit still with what they already have. That thought haunted me for days. It made me wonder if Erica had been running from something inside herself, and I just happened to be standing next to her when she decided to flee. The following week, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name written in a handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with no greeting, no closing, just one sentence. You deserve to know what happened. At first, I thought it was a mistake, or worse, a prank. I tossed it on the counter and didn't touch it for 2 days, but it stayed in my periphery, whispering at the edges of my thoughts. Who had sent it? What did they mean? What truth could still be left unspoken after everything that had already been said and done? I didn't tell Lana about the letter, not right away. I wasn't ready to give it weight, but part of me couldn't shake the unease that crept in that night. I started checking the mailbox obsessively, hoping for a follow-up or an explanation. Nothing came, just bills and advertisements. The kind of mail that reminded me the world kept turning whether or not I was ready. I took the letter to therapy that week. My therapist, Dr. Marla Jensen, was a steady woman with silver streaks in her curls and a voice like velvet. She read the note, looked at me over her glasses, and asked what I thought it meant. I didn't know, but the fact that it came months after the divorce made me wonder what had been hidden all this time. Dr. Jensen didn't speculate. She just asked how it made me feel. That was her trick, asking questions that seemed simple but carried heavy answers. I told her it made me feel like I had missed something, like I had walked out of a burning house and left something behind. She nodded, said grief sometimes shows up disguised as unfinished business, and that I had the right to be curious. That night, I sat on the balcony long after Lana had gone home. The wind was sharp, the kind that bit through your clothes and reminded you that winter was approaching. I held the letter in my hand, the paper already worn at the edges from how many times I had unfolded it. I wasn't afraid of the truth. I just didn't know if I wanted it anymore. The next day, a phone call came that changed everything. I took a walk that evening to clear my head, away from the roadside motel and its suffocating floral bedspreads. The sky was drenched in the last light of day, streaks of orange and violet stretching across the horizon like a watercolor painting abandoned halfway through. The air had that early spring bite, cold but clean, and I welcomed it. I needed to feel something other than the dull hum of survival. Every few feet, I'd pass another rusted mailbox or an empty swing creaking in a yard. The town had a kind of hushed loneliness that mirrored something inside me. For once, I didn't resist it. I walked past the gas station, where the old man with a beard like a snowdrift nodded to me, and further down until the sidewalk ended and gave way to gravel. I found myself standing in front of a church, its white paint peeling and its front steps worn smooth. There was a sense of peace in the stillness, something I hadn't felt in years. I sat down on the steps, let my elbows rest on my knees, and exhaled the weight I'd been holding. I wasn't sure how long I sat there, but the sky turned a darker shade of indigo, and stars began to blink awake above me. I was about to head back when I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up, half expecting a stranger, but there she was, Nora. Her hands were tucked into her jacket, her hair pulled back loosely, and her eyes had that same searching softness I remembered from earlier. She didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me on the steps, her presence gentle but grounding. We stared straight ahead in silence, the way people do when they don't know where to start. "You left your notebook at the diner," she finally said, offering it to me. I hadn't even realized it was missing. "Thanks," I replied, taking it from her and clutching it tighter than I meant to. "You're right." I hesitated, then nodded. "I try. It helps me think." She tilted her head slightly. "I get that. I paint. Haven't done much of it lately, but I used to." "What do you paint?" She shrugged. "Places that don't exist. Places I wish did." There was a gravity in her words that caught me off guard. We fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that carries understanding. I glanced at her, and in the dim glow of the street lamp nearby, I saw the weariness in her face. The kind that didn't come from age but from life carving itself into a person. "Why are you here?" I asked, not as an accusation but as an invitation. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared out at the road, watching as a car passed in the distance. Then she said, "I came to leave someone behind, and maybe to find myself in what's left." I nodded slowly. "That's what I'm doing, too, I think." We sat like that a while longer, until the night grew too cold to ignore. She stood up, brushed off her jeans, and offered a half smile. "Come back to the diner tomorrow. I'll have something better than soup ready." I watched her walk away, the sound of her boots on the pavement growing fainter with each step. And when she disappeared around the corner, I realized something strange. I didn't feel as lost as I had an hour ago. Back at the motel, I placed the notebook on the nightstand and lay down fully dressed. Sleep didn't come easily, but my mind kept drifting to the sound of Nora's voice, to the warmth in her quiet presence, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't dream about my old life. I just rested in the quiet possibility of something new. The next day I returned to the diner. She was already behind the counter, hair up in a messy bun, sleeves rolled. When she saw me, her expression softened, and she waved me over. "I made peach cobbler. It's not fancy, but it's honest." I smiled. Honest sounds perfect. I took a seat in the corner booth. She brought me coffee and a plate of cobbler, warm and fragrant. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. But when I left, she handed me a small sketch on the back of a receipt. It was a drawing of the church steps. And there, barely visible, were two small figures sitting side by side. I didn't ask how she remembered so much. I just folded the sketch and tucked it into the back of my notebook. And something inside me, something I thought had long since gone numb, began to stir. Nathaniel had always believed that healing was a linear path, a journey from brokenness to wholeness, from confusion to clarity. But the motel days had taught him otherwise. Healing wasn't a road, it was a river, meandering and unpredictable. Sometimes it moved backward before it surged forward again, and sometimes it exposed the very things you thought you'd buried. On the morning that marked 2 months since he had arrived at the Blue Fern Motel, Nathaniel woke to the sound of an unfamiliar ringtone. It wasn't his phone. It was Charlotte's. She had fallen asleep beside him on the couch again, her head resting gently on his shoulder, her breath warm and slow. The screen of her phone buzzed and flashed until it lit up the room. He shifted, slightly, careful not to wake her, and glanced at the screen. Unknown caller. Something about it unsettled him, not because of the caller, but because Charlotte had reacted strangely to her phone a few times before. She always seemed to go tense, then quiet. She had never explained. Nathaniel didn't press until now. The call stopped, then started again. He gently nudged her awake. "Charlotte, your phone," he said quietly. She stirred and blinked, then grabbed the phone. Her face went pale. She turned it over so the screen faced down. "Spam," she whispered, but Nathaniel saw something else in her eyes. Fear, recognition. "Charlotte," he said slowly, "who keeps calling you?" She hesitated. "It's no one. Just someone from the past. You said you didn't have any family." "I don't." Nathaniel didn't press further. He could tell she was protecting something, or someone. But for the first time, doubt crept in. He trusted her, yes, but trust without knowledge was fragile. Later that afternoon, Charlotte went to the town pharmacy for some supplies. Nathaniel took the opportunity to clear his thoughts. He grabbed his coat and walked down the road toward the nearby lake. The air was cool and damp, the sky a swirling canvas of gray and silver. He thought about his ex-wife, about the woman she'd become, about the pieces she'd taken from him that he might never get back. He thought about the way she cried during the divorce mediation, not because she was sad, but because she was angry she had to face consequences. She had never wanted Nathaniel for who he was. She had wanted stability, appearances, power, and when he stopped being useful, she disposed of him. Charlotte wasn't like that. At least, he didn't think she was. Back at the motel, Charlotte returned with more than just supplies. She brought news. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice fragile. Nathaniel braced himself. "There's a man," she said, "from before. He ... he was dangerous. I left him a year ago. I ran, changed my number, but I think he found me." Nathaniel exhaled. "Is he violent?" "Yes. He never laid a hand on me. But he didn't have to. His words, his control, the way he isolated me. It was a different kind of violence." Nathaniel stepped closer. "Do you need protection? Do we need to go to the police?" She shook her head. "He's powerful, knows people, has influence." Nathaniel took her hands. "Then we'll be smart. We'll stay ahead of him. You're not alone in this." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. She kissed him, and for the first time, it wasn't out of passion or loneliness. It was trust. The days that followed were tense. The motel no longer felt safe. Nathaniel started noticing a black SUV parked near the gas station across the road. Twice it appeared, then disappeared. Once, he thought he saw a man inside with sunglasses and a sharp jawline. No movement, just watching. He took a photo of the license plate. Charlotte confirmed it wasn't his imagination. That's him, or at least, his people. Nathaniel contacted an old friend from his finance days, a cybersecurity expert named Jonas. He sent him the plate and asked for a favor. Within hours, Jonas had a name, Victor Lowell, a private security contractor with a history of shady affiliations and offshore holdings, paid through layered accounts. Clean on paper, dirty in practice. "Be careful," Jonas warned. "This guy doesn't make empty threats." That night, Nathaniel packed their essentials. "We're leaving," he told Charlotte. "We're somewhere he won't expect." They drove in silence for hours, heading east, toward the border of Vermont. Snow began to fall lightly as the mountains drew near. They found a secluded cabin owned by a former client of Nathaniel's, tucked into the pines. It was quiet, too quiet. 3 days passed. No signs of Victor, no SUV, no calls. Charlotte began to smile again. Nathaniel started to write again. He hadn't journaled since before the divorce, but now, words came easily. Healing felt real again, until the knock. It came late. Around midnight, one single knock, then silence. Nathaniel rose cautiously and looked through the peephole. Nothing. Then the phone rang. Charlotte's burner phone, a number no one had. She answered. "Put it on speaker," a deep voice said. "You can run, Charlotte. But I always find what belongs to me." Nathaniel grabbed the phone. "She doesn't belong to you." A pause. "You must be Nathaniel, the broken little investment boy." The call cut off. Charlotte was shaking. Nathaniel locked the doors, called Jonas again. "This ends now," he said. Jonas hesitated. "You're thinking of baiting him." "I'm thinking of finishing this." Nathaniel reached out to another contact, this one in law enforcement. A woman named Leela, who owed him a favor after he uncovered a financial corruption ring 3 years earlier. Leela confirmed that Victor Lowell had multiple investigations pending, but nothing had ever stuck. "Send me what you've got," she said. Nathaniel compiled everything. Plate photos, phone logs, recorded calls. Leela opened a federal case, but it would take time. "I just need a window," Nathaniel said. "Get him to slip." Charlotte was reluctant but agreed. They would draw Victor in, record his threats, and trap him. The bait. Charlotte would return. A call. One single message. "You win. I'm tired. Let's talk." Victor responded immediately. A meeting place. A remote parking lot. No police. But Nathaniel and Layla had a plan. When the night came, Charlotte stood in the cold, her phone on speaker, recording everything. Nathaniel was nearby with a long-lens camera. Layla's team was out of sight. Victor arrived, alone. At first, he stepped out, his voice calm, smooth, dangerous. "You always were dramatic, Charlotte. You always were a liar," she replied. Then he snapped. He grabbed her wrist. Nathaniel moved in fast, shouting. Victor turned and saw the camera. Then Layla's team swarmed in, guns drawn. Orders shouted. Victor tried to run but slipped on the icy ground. Cuffs, sirens, the end of a long shadow. Back at the cabin, Charlotte wept. Not from fear, but from release. Nathaniel held her for hours. Neither of them spoke. The silence said everything. But just as peace returned, Nathaniel received a message from his ex-wife. It read, "We need to talk. It's about your name being dragged into something serious." And just like that, the past reopened its mouth. Nathaniel stood at the edge of the overlook behind his rented cabin, staring at the rolling mist curling through the mountains. The chill of early morning kissed his cheeks. As the sun's hesitant rays struggled to cut through the fog, the stillness was deceptive. Beneath it, everything stirred truths, regrets, memories, and the growing awareness that his time in this temporary escape was drawing to an end. The night before, Evelyn had sat across from him in silence for what felt like hours. She hadn't left. She hadn't asked him to. They had simply remained, suspended in the quiet, as if time needed to breathe before it moved again. Nathaniel had thought about her words, about the guilt she carried, about her truth, and now he had to decide what to do with it all. A knock at the cabin door broke the morning trance. He turned slowly, pulling the door open to find Evelyn holding 2 coffees, her red scarf loosely wrapped around her neck. "Thought you might want company," she said, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Nathaniel accepted the cup silently. They sat on the small bench outside, letting the warmth of the drink anchor them. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said after a while. She nodded. "I figured." The quiet stretched again. "I can't stay here forever, and I can't pretend this place is separate from my life. Eventually, I have to return to it." Evelyn looked down at her coffee and her "Will you go back to her?" He shook his head. "No. That chapter closed the moment I realized I couldn't forgive her, not for what she did to me, but for how easily she turned our life into a lie." Evelyn glanced sideways at him. "Forgiveness isn't about giving someone else peace. It's about giving yourself a way forward." Nathaniel turned her words over in his mind. Maybe she was right. Maybe the act of forgiving wasn't about holding anyone accountable. It was about releasing the weight. They stood and walked without speaking. The trail behind the cabin wound through golden leaves and overrun roots. They came to the little wooden bridge where they'd once paused and watched the river split around a stone. "Do you think people can change?" Nathaniel asked. Evelyn tilted her head. "Not overnight. Not completely. But I think we can become more of what we were always meant to be, if we're honest." He leaned on the rail, eyes following the water. "I've been angry for so long, I don't know who I am without it." "Then let yourself find out." That night, Nathaniel packed his clothes, his notebook, the half-read novel he'd left by the bed. The cabin felt both familiar and foreign, a place that had held his grief, and now his clarity. He paused before closing his suitcase, staring at the photograph Evelyn had left for him earlier, her and her sister, smiling, tangled in a hammock, barefoot and joyful. On the back, she'd written a single sentence, "To remember the moment before everything changed." He tucked it into the inner pocket of his coat. The city was louder than he remembered. Or maybe he had just gotten used to the hush of mountains and late-night confessions. Nathaniel stepped into his apartment, greeted by the stale scent of disuse and the sharp silence of vacancy. There were no messages on the machine, no notes on the door, just emptiness. He didn't call anyone. He didn't go to work. For 2 days, he simply existed, cooked, read, walked aimlessly. On the 3rd day, he received a letter. It was from Evelyn. She hadn't signed it, but he knew her handwriting. Inside, she wrote about a new job offer in a town a few hours away. a small bookstore cafe that needed someone who understood how to listen. She was going. She didn't ask him to follow, didn't ask anything, only said this: "Sometimes, silence is what teaches us how to speak again." Nathaniel stared at the letter for a long time. Then he picked up his phone, not to call Evelyn, but to call his father. They hadn't spoken in nearly a year. His father's voice cracked with surprise and emotion when he answered. And in that conversation, they didn't fix everything, but they started, and that was enough. 6 months later, Nathaniel stepped into a bookstore with creaky floors and ivy crawling up its windows. The smell of roasted beans mingled with aged pages. Evelyn stood behind the counter, stacking books with gentle precision. He didn't say anything. She looked up. Their eyes met, and in that moment, filled with shared memories, ache, and possibility, they both smiled. No words, none needed. The silence between them said everything.